You know, when you're growing up and you're in school, you're the hope of the world. And the minute you graduate, you're an absolute bloody failure. And this always haunted me. I always had trouble with mathematics and arithmetic and anything with numbers. And I discovered later that I was dyslexic, but in those days, during the war and after the war, and not until the 60s did they isolate that. And you never really grow out of it, you learn to accommodate it. So I went through, applying to college. I graduated from high school with those dreadful 9 Ds, all in math and arithmetic and algebra. And they gave me the Ds because they were really Fs, but they wanted to get me out of there. And so I found a college that I could get into, since 7 universities wouldn't take me at all because of those dreadful grades. And started a new school for the young veterans coming back from World War II, and it was in the basement at night, how ignoble, of a high school out in Bethesda. And I attended that school for 1 semester and got very good grades because I could take anything that had to do with accounting or math. And I got into the University of Maryland, where in 3.5 years I graduated, only because I switched majors away from business and public administration to painting. The thing about architecture is that every day it's a new experience. It never repeats itself. And contractor stories, building stories, proportion, scale, light, commodity, and firmness, and delight is new every day. I was 5 years out of Yale and had my own office, and I had the cover of Architectural Record, which at the time, and still is, a very important professional journal. And there was a house I did on the cover. And a couple of days later, Lou used to call, twice a week or once a month, but just to gossip or just to check in. And he said, my secretary said, there's a Mr. Khan on the phone. And I went in, and the tradition in architectural school anyway, when the master came by, you stood up and he sat down. Well, I stood up and found myself talking to Lou on the phone, standing up next to my desk. And he said, oh, by the way, after about 10 minutes of talk, he said, I saw that issue of Architectural Record. And I lowered my eyes and started to smooth the rug out with my toe. And he said, I'm so glad you did that. I hope you got it out of your system. We all have to do a house like that, and for God's sake, forget it. And he believed in that very much. There was no such thing as a good crit, he would say. He said, you've got to hit them hard, never favorably, so you can prepare them to face a client or a review board. Good sense. Right now, it seems in my profession that they're following a policy of nothing succeeds like excess. I mean, to build after the awful event of 9/11, where those dreadful guys flew into the World Trade Center, and you couldn't rent anybody above the 10th floor. Now they're building buildings that are, for Christ's sake, 280 feet tall, 2,080 feet tall. And it just seems excessive. Lou used to say, I've never seen a city that gets better by going up. And I don't know one either. My city, Washington, copies itself after Paris, where everything doesn't go up over 130 feet. And therefore, the Capitol Dome, the Washington Monument, they tell you what this city is.
But I think they're trying to change that law.
Oh, they're always. I mean, the worst architects and the biggest hacks in the world are always saying, oh, you're moving in on my creativity. What a crock. We'll all look like Rosslyn, Virginia. It is the same, I have found, this act of creativity, of making something out of nothing. It's the same in your profession. It's the same with a doctor, and God help us with a lawyer. That you design, and when you're making something out of nothing, you do it all alone. It's terribly painful when it doesn't come. You think you've lost it. And it becomes like an equation that you solve. That if this is true, you do this, and you just moving it around. I've talked to many professions about this. It's the same process. If you're trying to figure out what to do with somebody's spleen, you do your research, as I look at my research in my library of all of my books, and try to find somebody that hit this thing going in some path that was quite correct, that might help me 2,000 years later. But sooner or later, you have to start moving the graphite around. And I can design forever, and all of a sudden the client will call and say, where are the bloody drawings? So then I've got to suddenly cough it up. The thing that gets rather embarrassing, architects are supposed to grow and develop. I'm still doing this stuff. I mean, but, you know, as Lou says, it's like my bookcases. You know, I mean, I designed those in 1965 in the other house up on P Street. And anyone who collects books, you can take out a whole section because you're always changing your collection because you're buying new books. And you take out a section, in the normal library they all fall down. Not here, I can take a whole section and rearrange my book. And I made it very thin so I could get a wall of color out of it. And well, they're going in my houses still. It's now become a trademark. And I can hear Lou saying, there are no solutions in architecture, Jacobsen. But it works. I got my practice started in 1958. And a year ago, last June, was 50 years. It's now 51. And I thought at the time that we'd do something different. And Simon has been with me for, since he was 11, but full time as he got out of graduate school in architecture. For 15 years he's been here. And it's, you know, your library and my library are filled, not yours and mine particularly, but a lot of our friends are filled with the tragedies of fathers and sons who have tried to work together. And Simon and I, we really get along, and he's good at what he does. I'm just so pleased. So the firm is now no longer Hugh Newell Jacobsen FAIA. It is now Jacobsen Architecture, Hugh Newell Jacobsen FAIA with Simon Jacobsen AIA.
It's nice to pass the torch.
You bet. After our introductory talks and the first drawing, you know, this is where it all began. It's a house that we're doing in the Cayman Islands, and this is my sketch. And we get back to that as it's handed off to my architect, who put it to scale and everything on the computer. I wish that we had, you know, a set of details that you could apply to every building. It's never the same. You know, every building has its own order and its own light, quality of light that's unique to it, and it changes all the drawings. You can't bring out number 104 and put it on the board again. It's in my lifetime it has changed considerably, the practice of architecture and of how one operates as an architect, because most people are doing much larger projects as architects, and the ones that are, you know, it's an interesting statistic that the average American architectural firm is 2 people. Isn't that neat? Mm-hmm. And, you know, I feel absolutely like Skidmore, Owings and Merrill with 10. Mm-hmm. But what is happening to my profession is that fewer people are building individual houses. More people are buying tract houses and apartments and moving more and more people into the city. And so that people that in my line of work become rather rare. The average married couple, they move, you know. They may build a house, one of my houses, and then move because his job has changed and he's going off someplace else. And we really are a nation of nomads. I mean, look at us. Look where you live, way out there, and I live here still, but I'm very rare. I'm always amazed is that in my lifetime, which to me is rather short, the population of the world has doubled. Just imagine that. When I came, you know, on this earth, we had, 1.3 million Americans. Now we have 3.10 million Americans. And look at China. So we're up to our ears in people, and therefore the demand for new buildings and buildings that are outdated, that have fallen down, to replace them. And the construction industry is stepping faster into that mode rather than the architect. Mm-hmm. The architect is, we're accused of being in an ivory tower, that we're an expensive luxury, and that we won't listen to anything, and our buildings leak and all of that. If your building leaks, you're not in business very long. You know, the word gets out.